It's my very great pleasure to be here and share Vijay Krishna's third lecture. Vijay's father was taught us when we were at the Delhi school. Vijay has been a friend and a mentor for many, many years. And he's just the most wonderfully clear expositor I know. So Vijay, all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. You can see the screen, I hope.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, good. This is some recent work I've been doing with you.
I can't see your screen. Oh, switch. Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah.
Now you can? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is some work which I've been doing with you, Awaya, who's at the University of Rochester. And this lecture is on a theme different from the first two lectures. Had this communication as the link, and this is a new venture for me and somewhat unconnected with the first two lectures, but I hope you'll find it interesting anyway. So the question we are we hope to deal with in this paper is, why is it that innovations seem to come from new firms rather than existing firms? So the whole technology of an electric car is quite standard. It's been, an electric motor is much simpler than an internal combustion or a petrol motor, and has been understood for 100 years, if not longer. So why is it that it took a small new firm, a startup like Tesla, to bring this successfully to market, and not one of the big existing automobile firms? Similarly, why is it that even though these existing retailers had a lot of experience with logistics and shipping and so on, why is it that the new firm, Amazon, succeeded in this business of retail marketing over the internet rather than existing firms? That's okay. So really, why is it that startups are the source of so many innovations? And this is an old question, which is we're not the first to address this. Here's some data. Forgive me for presenting some data. So this is a history of the hard disk industry, which was written by Christensen from Harvard Business School, Clayton Christensen. And his book was in 1997 called The Innovator's Dilemma, in which he recounts how the hard disk industry developed. And the pace of innovation was amazing in this industry. So something like 1978, about that time, the first hard disks appeared. Before that, you had to have computer cards or magnetic tape, and then these hard disks came out. And the first hard disk was made by IBM, and it was 14 inches in diameter. And then successively, innovation took place because the size of the disk shrank. So it was 14, then 8, then 5, 3, 2, 1.8, and now it's 0 because hard disk no longer exists. We have flash memory now everywhere. But you can see that every 2-3 years, there was a new generation of hard disks that came out. And what you see on the rightmost column is the dominant firm in the industry with the maximum sales for disks of that size, right? So of course, IBM was the first and perhaps the only one. And then this company called Shugart took over, and then Seagate, which you may know the name, took over. And then there was this other company and this other company that took over. And almost for every generation, every new generation, every innovation was carried out by a new firm. A new firm became dominant in this, not the existing firm. So no firm. In fact, if you look at the whole cumulative industry, new entrants had a 98% share. At one point, there were over 60 firms manufacturing hard disks. There were more than 100 entrants into this industry over the 20-year period, but only 17 or something made it to the end. So they came, dominated for a little while, for one generation, and then left. Dominated for one generation and left, or became very had a very, very low market share after that. So again, it's the same theme that the new firms seem to make the transition in this industry, and this is Christensen's quite amazing finding. Okay. As I said, this is not a new question. In fact, Arrow in 1962 wrote a very famous paper about this fact, and he argued that. So imagine there's a monopolist, and his current profits are M0 with the current technology, and there's a new technology, let's say maybe a cost-reducing technology or some new kind of product, which would increase profits to M, which is bigger than M0. So M0 is current profits, and this is like future profits. And then what Arrow said was, well, the reason new entrants are favored in this regard is that the monopolist has these current profits, which he doesn't want to give up. So the gain to him from the innovation is just the new profits minus the old profits, whereas the entrant doesn't have any existing profits. So the gain to the entrant from the new innovation is M itself. And what he said, this is sometimes, I think John Turrell called this the replacement effect. And the reason is the monopolist is replacing himself, whereas the entrant is replacing the monopolist. So this is a situation which, suppose there'll be a new patent and the old technology will die out completely. So this replacement effect, of course, favors entrants because of this existing pre-existing profits of the monopolist. So this was Arrow's argument as why it is that new entrants or startups or have a greater incentive to innovate than existing firms. So then there's a counter argument, sometimes called the preemption effect, and this favors incumbents rather than entrants, the monopolists, if you will. And this is due to Gilbert and Newberry. And what is this effect? This effect assumes there's a duopoly and starts from the simple identity that monopoly profits are bigger than total industry profits in duopoly. So if each firm is making profits D, then the total industry profits are 2D. And if there was a single firm, then those profits would be higher than this. And now if you rearrange that inequality like this, subtract D from both sides, what is the left-hand side? The left-hand side are the incentives of the monopolists to keep the duopolist out, right? So currently if there's a duopolist, if he enters, there's a duopolist, and this is the gain to the monopolist from keeping the entrant out, and this is the gain of the entrant. It's D minus 0. So this says in this market structure, the gain to the monopolist from the innovation is greater than the gain of the entrant from the innovation. So this runs counter to this. Here, the gain to the entrant is bigger, and here the gain to the monopolist is better. So there are slightly different market structures involved here. There's a patent here. There's going to be a duopoly, but in reality, some things in between. And this effect seems to favor incumbents. So we don't really know. There's no clean result as to who has the greater incentive to innovate. Now, in a very nice paper, Igami went back to the hard disk industry, which I talked about here, and looked at just one transition from 5.25 to 3.5 inches. This was a big, this 5-inch disc around for a long time before they moved to 3.5 inches. And he built some structural model, and he found that Arrow's argument explains about 60% of this turnover. So his argument really is that, if Seagate dominated the 5.25-inch industry and somebody came to them and says, now there's a 3.5-inch possibility, should we try to develop that? They'll say, no, because I have all my existing customers. I don't want to lose those people if I move to the new.
Vijay, can I ask you a question at this stage?
Yes, of course.
So when we're thinking of hard disks, I think the market share is just huge, of the largest firm. But when you're thinking of cars, that's not the case, right? Especially when you're thinking of the global market. So there are many large car producers, if you look worldwide, rather than just looking within the US. And even in the US, there were 3 for a long time.
But they're not very many. I think once you put Toyota and Hyundai and a couple around, and the US firms, that's about it. The European firms, don't have very big market share.
So we're talking about 5 or 6 in any case.
Yes.
And so you feel that what you have to say applies to that kind of
this is it's not specific to any industry, and of course, as I said, reality is always more complicated in this. But we're just looking at broadly at some of the incentives of entrance versus incumbents. That's all.
Right, but for any kind of market share,
any kind of market structure, right?
Profile, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So Igami's empirical work found that somehow 60% of the turnover could be explained by just this arrow effect, that you don't want to give up your existing business that makes you reluctant to innovate. And so what we are going to do in our model is to actually shut down all these replacement and preemption effects. And we're going to focus on something else entirely, which is some informational asymmetry. So it won't be the case that the monopolist is different from the entrant in any way other than information, because we want to focus on that. That's not to say they're not different, it's just that we want to focus on this. And this will become clear in a second. Okay. So we're going to study this rather simple kind of patent race. So there'll be 2 firms. Firm 1 will represent the incumbent firm. And as I said, the only difference will be informational. So who's incumbent and who's not. And firm 2 will be the entrant or the startup. And the patent race will run in continuous time. And profits will be discounted using an interest rate of R. And R&D, when you undertake R&D, you have to incur a flow cost of C per unit of time. And then while you're doing R&D, success will come randomly in a way that I'll explain in a second. And whoever gets the first success will get a patent, and then we'll get flow profits of M, which is like monopoly profits forever afterwards, right? So this will be the very simple model. So both of us will start out, let's say, investing in R&D, incurring this cost. And then at some point, success might come. It could also be that we give up because we don't think success is likely, but I will explain all that. But in any case, the first person to get success, to have success, becomes a monopolist and gets this forever. You could also drop out if you become pessimistic about the chances of success. Then you say it's not worth my while to keep investing like this. In that case, you drop out of the race. And once you drop out of the race, the other person can see that you've dropped out of the race. This may happen with some delay. It doesn't matter. But in any case, once you drop out of the race, you cannot re-enter the race. So exit is final in this. So that's the model. Okay. So now there's some uncertainty about the whole situation. So we don't really know whether the innovation that we're going after would succeed or not. So, and there are 2 states of nature. So either there's a good state or a bad state. And there's a probability pi that we have the good state. And all this is known to everybody. So in the good state, success arrives randomly at a rate lambda, right? So if I'm investing and then I get success comes at this exogenously given rate lambda. And this is independently across firms. So if both of us are investing, then the arrivals are independent. I could get an arrival or you could get an arrival, and this will happen. Of course, the first arrival ends the race, so there's nothing more to say over there. On the other hand, if the state if the innovation is not feasible, then we could keep investing forever and success would never come. There's no chance of success. So what happens in this race is you start with some probability. There's a 0.7 probability that the innovation will succeed, right? That there's a chance of success. And then we keep investing and keep investing. And as you keep investing, you become pessimistic, or maybe the state is bad. And you'll see how that happens. So I won't tell you about other work in this area. So here's the only asymmetry in the model is here. So the asymmetry is that before the race starts, we have some information about whether or not the innovation is successful in the form of these signals, GI and BI. So GI obviously brings good news and BI brings bad news. These are distributed as follows. So the probability that firm I will get a good signal in the good state, we assume is the same as the probability that this firm will get a bad signal in the bad state, and that is exhaustively given as QI, this number QI. And it's at least a half so that these signals are informative about the state. Is there a question I can answer? What's your question? Okay, go on. So, so we're given this parameter tells you the quality of firm I's information. The higher this is, the more you know about the state after you've received your signal. And now what we suppose is that the only asymmetry between the incumbent firm and the startup is that the incumbent firm has better information. The quality of its information is better than that of the entrant. So perhaps they just know more about this kind of drug that we are developing or something. So they have a better idea than the startup. And so this is the only asymmetry in this model. In every other way, it's alike. So what are other ways? The chance of success is the same for both. If they invest, the interest rate is the same, the cost is the same, the gains are the same, M is the same. So everything is the same except for the fact that one has better quality information. The quality of one's information is better than that of two. That's the only. All right, so it's in essence a very simple kind of model. And here's the main result. The main result is that if firm 1 is much better informed, that is Q1 is, remember what better informed just means that Q1 is bigger than Q2. If firm 1 is better informed, much better informed than Q2, there's a unique equilibrium of this game in which firm 2, the less informed firm, wins more often and has a higher expected profit than firm 1. So remember, we're thinking of firm 2 as the startup, which has poor information. And so
Vijay Siddharth, who asked the question, is still confused. So he would like to know a little bit more about whether you just succeed once or multiple times. I'm going to ask Siddharth to unmute and ask his question.
No, why don't you just, read out the questions as they come. I couldn't. Okay.
Okay, so he asks, is it a sequence of successes or just one success? Please explain the Poisson rate. So once there's a success, is that the end or what?
No. So the success arrives at this rate, lambda, and the first time it arrives, the game's over. Because that means you succeeded in your innovation. So that's the thing. So there's only one, the first arrival for either firm ends the race, because then you've succeeded, the vaccine works and you can go on.
Yeah, okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, good, yeah. Okay. So, but the main result is somewhat counterintuitive. It says that the firm with the better information actually loses the race more often, and the firm with worse information wins more often and has a higher expected payoff. So it's not saying it wins more often because perhaps it overinvests and loses money or something like that. No, its expected payoff is also higher than that of firm. So I'm going to try to explain how this comes about as we go. Okay. So the key idea is that as the race proceeds, firms learn from each other, right? In the sense that if you haven't dropped out, then I learned that your information might be quite good because you're still continuing to work. On the other hand, if I see you drop out, then I learn maybe your information wasn't that good, and I learn from that. So during the course of the race, we will learn from each other, and the point is that the poorly informed startup, it'll turn out, as we'll show, has a stronger incentive to learn than the better informed incumbent or monopolist. And this incentive overcomes the initial informational disadvantage that goes on, right? This is the driving force of this thing. So you might immediately ask, is this just a model we're thinking of? Do firms actually do this? Are there patent races like that? You might wonder, is this just some fancy theoretical thing that we thought about? So here's some work done by Joshua Krieger on pharmaceuticals, which of course, because of the current crisis, we are immediately interested in. So here's this remarkable data set of more than 10,000 projects pharmaceutical projects, developing drugs for various things. And these are all drugs that reached phase 2 trials. So now because of the pandemic, everybody knows what phase 2 and phase 3 is, but these are all drugs that reach phase 2 trials. And what happens in pharmaceuticals is that by law, all the data has to be, all the trial results, etc., are made public. They have to be made public, right? Because they're reported to the Food and Drug Administration here, and they always make these things public. So you always know how your rivals are progressing in their research. So when phase 1 is complete, that's made public. When phase 2 is complete, those results are known. Phase 3, etc., etc. And what he finds in this data, it's a large data set, is that if there are two firms involved in making a similar drug, and the other firm quits, then that significantly increases the quitting probability of a given firm, right? So they are paying attention to what the other firm does. And so I ask, is this kind of learning real? This is the main finding of this paper, that in fact, firms do learn from the fact that other firms have quit. And you also find something that also resembles a little bit from what we are saying, is that newer firms that do not have a history of making a lot of new medicines, they seem to react more to an established firm quitting than the other firm quitting. This result is actually in the working paper version of this paper. This is now forthcoming in management science. So his empirical work has some features which our model predicts in this.
Vijay, I want to come back to this market structure issue here.
Yeah.
Because when you're thinking about a monopolist, then it's basically you're replacing one monopolist with another. When
Yes.
you're thinking about multiple firms, then there seem to be two effects at play, right? On the one hand, you're learning information about whether you're going to be successful or not, but
Yes.
It's uncertain information. But on the other hand, if you are successful, then your profits might increase because you'll have a larger market share if somebody quits.
Yes, of course.
So there might be there might be variations in the strength of this effect with larger number of firms.
Yeah, we are looking at this thing in the case of that there will be only one winner at the end. Is that what you're after?
Yeah.
So here there's no sharing of the market. There's a patent, and then that's it. So you're right that if the thing was different, then if two firms could coexist later, then
like Covaxin and whatever, Covishield and so on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And actually, but the interesting thing is, even for the vaccines, both the two successful vaccines, as we were talking about right now, is the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. And this was not developed by Pfizer, which is a big pharmaceutical company. The vaccine was actually developed by the small BioNTech, which is a very small German firm, which employs less than 100 people.
Right.
And similarly, Moderna is a startup company. They have never developed a major drug so far. This is their first major drug. So even in this case, it's the smaller firms that have developed vaccines. And you would think that all these existing firms should already, who make other sorts of vaccines and so on, should have the advantage in making one. But that didn't happen here.
Right.
All right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
So
Vijay,
here, yes.
Rohini, could I just
Yes.
ask a sort of clarification?
Yeah, Abhijit.
So,
This is Abhijit Banerjee.
Yes.
So if my rival quits, do I have a sort of winner's curse kind of effect or something that's going on, or
if your rival,
you know, so does that sort of give me a sort of feeling that hey, I've stayed on too long or something?
Yes, everybody will behave optimally here, but what happens here is, yes, you do become more pessimistic if you see your rival quit, because it's more indicative that his information was not that good. But you'll see how the equilibrium works in a second.
So the posterior becomes lower than the prior.
Yes, it changes suddenly, in fact, as you'll see.
Yeah.
So if you just hold off on that question, ask me again if you don't see this feature. But it's not exactly like a winner's curse kind of thing. So here's just, so we were talking about the pharmaceutical industry, and I want to say that this empirical work of Joshua Krieger actually echoes a lot of what we're doing in the theory. And so here's a specific example. In 2018, there was this company, Insight, and they stopped trial of some chemical IDO inhibitor-based cancer drug, which was supposed to apply to use in many cancers, but their trials failed and they stopped the drug. And there was another company in New Link Genetics, which were also working on an IDO inhibitor drug. And then they quit immediately. And they cited explicitly, we're quitting because our competitor quit, not because our trial failed, but because the competitor's trial, they were not making exactly the same drug for the same cancer, but they said, oh, this is not working as this thing. And then Bristol Myers, which is a very big pharmaceutical company, they also followed, and they said explicitly that emerging data on the IDO pathway makes us pessimistic and we are quitting. And it was not because of their own trial, but because this company quit, and this was public. So you can explicitly see this kind of learning from firm to firm.
Vijay, there's an interesting question again by Siddharth Chatterjee on asymmetric updating. So he says, is it that legacy firms have a superiority complex in that they do not learn easily from startups? Or is it that they worry that the large consumer base might suspect their reputation? So this is on differential updating, I think. So
right. So first of all, we don't have any psychological effects in this model, of this thing. Everybody will behave rationally, and yes, it will be the case that the legacy firms will learn less or slower than the startups will. So that will be a feature of the model, and that's what drives this result, actually. So I hope I answered that question. If I didn't, ask again. Okay, good. So let's see how this works. So there are two steps to this proposition. I break it up into two steps. First, I'll show that for all values of the parameters, etc., there's always an equilibrium which firm 2 wins more often as a higher payoff. Right? So the only thing the interesting part here is that actually it turns out, and proposition 2 says that 1 is much better informed than 2 then in fact, this equilibrium outcome is unique. There's nothing else. So there's the unique outcome. So that these will be the two propositions will establish the main result. Okay. So let's see how this whole thing works a little bit. And I think maybe some of the questions about updating, etc., will become clear now. Okay, so let me remind you of the different parameters first. So lambda is the arrival rate of success. M is the flow, represents the flow monopoly profits. R is the interest rate, and C is the flow cost of R&D. So let's define P star. So this is a probability that the state is good, the probability that the innovation is feasible. So if we think of this, the probability that the innovation is feasible times the instantaneous arrival rate, right? So this is the instantaneous success I'm going to get this instant anytime in the race, right? And when I get in success, this is the value of the success because I'll get M forever. And this is the discounted present value of all the monopoly profits. And this is the cost of doing R&D for one more second, right? That's the way to. In the next second, this is the chance that the success will arrive. But success arrives only if the state is good. This is the likelihood that the state is good. And then this is the expected gain equals the cost here, the instantaneous cost. So if you rearrange this, then that's called P star, this number. These are the four parameters in the problem. And we denote this number by P star. And effectively what happens is that if you think that the likelihood that the innovation is feasible is smaller than P star, then you should definitely quit, because then the expected gain is less than the cost. Expected gain of continuing for another second is less than the expected, and then the cost of continuing for another second. So this is this threshold probability or threshold belief that will show up often. So to begin with, let's just forget about two firms. Let's just look at a single firm. Suppose there was a single firm in the industry, so there's no rival, right? And so this firm should invest as long as, so it got some information, it got some signal. As a result, it has some posterior belief about the state being good. And as long as that's bigger than P star, you should stay in the race or continue to invest. And the minute it reaches P star, you should exit. And what you can see is that you can write this posterior belief in terms of the likelihood ratio. This is the likelihood ratio. And the likelihood ratio declines at the rate lambda. All this is saying is that as you go on, you keep investing, and success doesn't come, you become pessimistic at this rate. This is the rate at which you become pessimistic. So this is the belief that you started out with. This is how beliefs erode, and this is the belief at time t. So you started at time 0 with this belief. Over time, it becomes like it goes down to this, and when it reaches P star over 1 minus P star, you should quit stated in terms of likelihood ratio. So beliefs decrease at this rate in this problem. So if a single firm quits, it's very easy to see what you should do. So what I have in the x-axis here is time running on this axis and the beliefs of the firm running on this axis. And so you start with some belief at time 0, and as success doesn't come, it declines at this exponential rate, but at some point it reaches P star. This is not 0, it's P star on the vertical axis. At that point, you should quit. So for a single firm, the problem is very simple. You just do this. Okay. And if you were to write the value function, so value function now on the x-axis, I don't have time, but the person's belief, and this is the value of staying in the race, your expected profit in the future at this time. And now you start somewhere here, you don't start. And then over time, what happens is that the belief moves to the left because it declines. And when it reaches P star is when you should quit. So you can think of either picture if you like. Okay. So for the single firm problem, there is no surprise. It's just this is just like a benchmark results. If firm 1 is better informed, its quality, it has better information. And if firm 1 were alone, then it would succeed more often than if firm 2 would be if firm 2 were alone, right? Because it just has better information. And firm 1 also has a higher payoff. So there are no surprises in the single firm problem. The better informed firm, when alone, succeeds more often as a higher payoff than the less informed firm if it were alone. Right? So single firm problem. Nothing, no surprises. Just to say nothing. There's nothing strange built into the model. This is just. So it's very easy to see that if you were alone, then it's optimal to stay if and only if your belief about the feasibility of the innovation is greater than B star. If it falls below, you should leave. With 2 firms, now you can sort of see that this may not be the case. It's still optimal to stay if your current belief is higher than this threshold belief that we established. That's where profits become 0. But now it may be optimal to stay longer than B star. And the reason is that because there's this other firm, you might hope to learn the rival's information, but it could improve your beliefs in the future. So even currently you're pessimistic, but it may be that given that the rival has stayed so long, you think that his information is good. And if you learn that, maybe that you could get good information in the future. So there's always this option value that nice. So let's some small bit of notation, but then everything will be relatively simple. So let's define, given what firm 1 knows, firm 1 gets a signal, which is either B or G, and firm 2 gets a signal, which is either B or G. So given any pair of signals, let's define P of S1, S2 as the posterior probability that the state is good, the innovation is feasible, conditional on these two signals. And it's very easy to see, since the quality of one's information is higher than the quality of 2's information, these posterior probabilities can be ranked. So this is the posterior probability. This is an as if posterior probability. This is as if you knew both signals, what would the probability be? Of course, you start out knowing only your own signal, but this is what we're computing here. So 2 bad signals are the worst, 2 good signals are the best, and B1 is worse than, B1 G2 is worse than G1 B2 because Q1 is higher than Q2. So B1 brings you much worse news. B1 G2 gives you worse news than G1 B2. This is better. This is higher quality. One signal is higher quality, so this is what the ranking is. And now let's define the following. So if this number is bigger than P star, define this as the time at which the beliefs would deteriorate to this threshold value. So you start out with these beliefs. Both firms are experimenting, right? They continue to invest. And so now they continue to recall when we had only one firm, the beliefs decayed at the rate lambda. And now 2 firms are experimenting. So if you've got to this stage, it must be that both have failed until now. So in fact, the beliefs decline even at a higher rate. They actually decline at the rate 2 lambda rather than lambda, because there are 2 firms experimenting. There are 2 failures, and they happen independently. So all I mean is that this is the optimal time at which you should exit. After that's unprofitable, if both firms have experimented until now, and these were the beliefs. So this is just a formal definition. And this is less than this, then you shouldn't enter at all, which says that this is, you exit immediately at time 0. Okay, so this number is the optimal exit time for a firm with these beliefs, such that starting with these beliefs is the time when they reach the threshold value. That's this. So when will you reach the threshold value? Okay. So just in a picture, suppose you started out with these beliefs, you knew both the signals, then over time they would deteriorate at the rate 2 lambda, and they would reach, when they reach this point, which is P star, that's when you should exit. And that time we denote TG1, G2, and this time is G1, etc., etc. In this picture. And if you were to write the value functions, then they also deteriorate. And we're really asking, when does the value become 0? The value of continuing is 0. So that's when this thing happens. These are equivalent formulations. Now here's the learning part. Here's the learning. So what happens when firms learn? So let's say I'm a firm and I got a good signal. I'm firm 1 and I got a good signal. And so I start out like this. I know my other rival is also experimenting, and my beliefs deteriorate. My value goes down. My value goes down. And now what happens is I suddenly learn that the other firm quit. This is like what happened in the pharmaceutical thing. One of my rivals quit. If my rivals quit, there are 2 effects to this, and maybe this is something that Rohini was alluding to. We see this in the very small. So on the one hand, I become pessimistic, right? Because I do become pessimistic because I think he quit. That's not good news. He may have got a bad signal. On the other hand, I realize that the other firm has exited, and now I'm a monopolist in this race. There's no rival in this race. So that causes a jump in my profits. So initially, you would think it causes, there are 2 effects. There's the fact that I become more pessimistic because I see my rival quit. On the other hand, I also realize, oh, my rival quit. I'm all alone now. So there's no, I can take my time and continue the R&D. So you have this kind of effects. On the other hand, it could also be that my rival stays, right? So my rival stays. I'm coming along and I learned that my rival stayed. Well, that makes me more optimistic about this, about the fact that innovation is feasible. This is my rival. If he had quit at this time, then that would be bad news. The fact that he didn't quit tells me that he got a good signal, and that gives me an upward jump in value, in future value, and then they deteriorate again. So here, there are 2 firms throughout, so there's no jumping this thing, but in fact, this is all good news if my rival stays. Okay, good. So let me explain how this equilibrium works. And so there are 2 components to a strategy. A strategy here has 2 components in this sort of game. So one is, it says, given my own information only, when should I quit if the other firm has not quit? Right? It's just like a unilateral exit. So this is, I'm in a race. We've been making this product for 3 years already. We've been doing R&D for 3 years, making this drug. The other firm is still continuing. Should I leave? And if I decide to leave, even if the other firm is continuing unilaterally, then that time is denoted by tau I. The other component of the strategy is what I should do if I see that my rival quit after 18 months. Right? My rival quit after 18 months. When should I quit? And of course, this number has to be more than 18 months. So maybe this says my rival quits at 18 months, then I should stay for another 3 months and then quit. So that's the kind of strategy that this is. So this is my rival's exit time, and there may be some delay, but I'm going to assume the delay is 0 for today. Okay. So these are the strategies for this equilibrium. And if I were to read these to you, I think we'd be here till 5 p.m. in India, and nobody would understand anything. So I'm going to try to explain everything in a picture. So we'll see if we can understand everything in the picture. So this is what the equilibrium looks like. So in the picture, the orange arrows and triangles belong to the established or legacy farm. And the green arrows and triangles belong to the startup or entrant farm. And what the triangles depict are the unilateral exit times. So what this strategy says is that the incumbent firm, if it has a bad signal, its information is bad and it's pessimistic, should unilaterally quit at this time TB1, right? TB1. TB1 is the time when this beliefs deteriorate to P star, the threshold value. On the other hand, if it has a good signal, then it stays unilateral. Even if the other firms are around, it stays until this number T, G1, G2. So we're going to show that this is an equilibrium. And similarly for the entrant firm, when its information is not that good, it stays unilaterally until TG1B2. And notice that this is much bigger than the time when the incumbent firm would quit unilaterally with bad information. So the one reason for that is that since one signal is more informative than two signal, when it gets a bad signal, its posterior probability drops by a lot more than firm 2's posterior probability. Firm 2 is willing to stay that long. And if 2 has a good signal, then it also stays until this time, this extreme time. What are the arrows? The arrows tell you how firms react to other people dropping out. Remember, there were two components to the strategy. The unilateral are the triangles, and these are the arrows. So what do the arrows say? So for firm 1, of course, if it has a bad signal, it quits here immediately, right? And firm 2 has never quit before that. But if it has a good signal, it keeps going. It decides to quit unilaterally until here. But then along the way, maybe it learns that firm 2 quit here, right? Because firm 2 quits. And then this arrow tells you that 1 follows 2 immediately. So if it sees 2 quit, it just quits immediately at the same time, just like 1 second later. Okay, so this is what one strategy is. One strategy, if I have a good signal, if I have a bad signal, I quit early. If I have a good signal, I wait, I keep investing, unless I see the other person drop out. If I see the other person drop out, then I'll drop immediately, because that tells me he has bad information. And if he doesn't drop out, then we'll both go to this point. And what is how does firm 2 react to 1 exiting? So 2 always enters. And then if it sees that 1 exited here, then it knows that 1 signal was bad. And if he himself has a bad signal, then he quits immediately, because that in fact already stayed too late. And if he has a good signal, then he stays until this point, which is the optimal time to stay, given that you know that the other firm has the signal B1. Is there a question?
Question from Siddharth again about, is firm 1 dropping out more discouraging to firm 2 in terms of conditional exit time as compared to the other way around?
Is firm 1, yes, because firm 1's exit brings you higher quality information, right? So it causes a steeper drop in the beliefs because his information is Q1, right? That's the thing. So yes, the answer is yes. All right, so I guess what you're asking is, suppose I knew only my own information. Let's say I'm from 2 and I know G2, but then I learned that the other firm got bad information. That drops my probability much more than if it were the other way around. That's because he has his information of higher quality.
That's the main mechanism, no, Vijay? That
will be the main mechanism. That will be
central
the main
mechanism.
One information, higher quality. That's right. Yeah, but this seems to suggest that this will cause 1 to drop out. Sorry, 2 to drop out quicker. But we'll see why this was.
So Vijay, can I just sorry, you could also want to answer this later, but I was just thinking of your response to Rohini's question, and it's you know, there's a winner take all nature here. So
yes,
you know, if you succeed, I don't.
Yes,
and I'm just wondering how that sort of you know, how turning that off a little bit might affect this.
You mean if we shared the
right in some sense, yeah.
I think the point here is to we have a very special goal, is to, I think all these things have been considered in the literature actually in other things. there's a big literature following the arrow effect and what happens with different kinds of market structures, and do we share the market? Do we share the patent? There are, even in our paper, we have references to so all these things have been considered. There isn't a clean answer in any of these things. It all depends on what you postulate as the market structure.
All right.
So we're after something different. We've put all that aside, all the asymmetries and these things aside, and just to focus on in the informational question. So that's my answer to this. So they do affect things, and the answer is not clear, I think, when they affect it. So what happens if there are all these things? What happens if I could license something from the other firm? So I lose, but then I obtain a license to co-manufacture something, you know, that kind of thing. So that's, of course, things will change if you do that. Okay. All right. So the interesting thing here is that in this equilibrium, what happens is firm 1 would quit here if it has a bad signal, and here it has a good signal. So that means for firm 2, by staying until this point TB1, it can learn what one signal was. So if one exits, then it knows one signal is B1. And if one doesn't exit right here, then you know that one has good information, that his signal is G1. So just by staying this long, firm 2 can learn one signal, right? Because these things are separated. These things are separated. So firm 2, and what firm 2 is doing after here, after he learns two signal, firm 2, after he learns one signal, is playing optimally, right? So if he learns that it's actually one also got a bad signal, I got a bad signal, firm 2 also got a bad signal, then I should have exited T, B1, B2, which is even smaller than this, already too late. I've lost some money exposed. So I should exit as soon as I can. On the other hand, if I learned that firm 1 had a good signal, then I should stay this long. This is just a little computation you have to do to see that this is the right amount of time to stay. So this is, everybody's playing a best response. And similarly over here, firm 1 can learn two signal at this point T, G1, B2. This is the earliest he can learn two signal, because both types of firm 2 stay at least until here. And here's where the separation takes place. And if firm 1 learns that 2 is exited, then he should exit immediately, because this is the optimal time to exit, given that this is one signal and this is two signal. That's how these things were defined. So this guy is also playing a best response. Okay. And the interesting thing is, why doesn't this firm, for firm 1 with bad information, the earliest this firm could learn two signal is over here, given 2 strategy. And then he just learns that it's already too late. I have a bad signal, and I learned this person has a bad signal. This is too late. Right? So I don't want to wait to learn what this 2 signal is.
Vijay, can I ask a tangential question? It just comes to mind. And
absolutely, yes.
So it seems that there's some value to just watching these guys doing whatever they're doing, right? So you know, you might think that, look, if time has passed and these people are not exiting, then
yes,
it might make sense to someone saying, look, you know, there's no bad signals that are coming out here. Should I come into the race for this patent?
yes.
Just any thoughts?
But I think the thing is that you just cannot enter a race in here. There's no scientific capital buildup, but usually you just cannot. At this moment, it's not possible for a company to just develop, you know, this messenger RNA vaccine now. It's just not possible. You know, this thing succeeds, but it's too late for them to.
But don't they come in at different times in general in innovation, or do they tend to come in at the same time?
A lot,
and they just leave at different times.
They leave it different in these data with pharmaceuticals. For any new kind of, so usually what happens is there's some scientific discovery, maybe sometimes outside the company also, that there's this important chemical that affects Alzheimer's disease, or important chemical that we can use to attack cancer treatment or something. And then these companies try to develop drugs. Like, so a lot of these drugs, they start roughly at the same time, and then the companies end at the same time.
Yeah, okay. And then related to that, then it seems that there's some value. Suppose you think that innovation is constrained both by technical knowledge and by deep pockets, because you need to start a lab, yes, or you need to be into a lab. Then it seems that there's real value to, consortia, like what the Gates Foundation was doing, was saying, okay, we're going to fund these many different people just to develop this, because the signal quality just improves. I mean,
absolutely,
the aggregate information out there.
I will say something about that later. If
okay.
I have to. Yeah. Yes, and that will be true. So consortia really do help in this. Okay. The point here is that you can see this sort of asymmetric learning that's going on. So 2 can wait. 2 only has to spend a little bit of money here, right, to invest for this small amount of time to learn what 1 knows. But 1 doesn't find it worthwhile to invest for all this time to learn this relatively poor quality signal, right? So 1's information is higher quality. 2 invests only a little bit and learns 1's information, which is higher quality. And 1 would have to invest quite a lot to learn this poor quality, and he doesn't want to wait, and that's why with the bad signal, he exits early. And in fact, the whole thing holds together like this. So this is what I meant at the beginning, that there's some asymmetries in the incentives to learn. So 1 does not have the incentive to learn 2 signal. He says, he doesn't know much. Why should I spend so much money to learn this? He doesn't know too much. But that's not the case for 2. 2 does want to wait to learn what 1 knows. And in fact, because 1 doesn't want to learn, it doesn't cost too much to learn. The whole thing sort of feeds on each other. So so he exits on the basis of his own information. He never tries to learn what 2 is. 2 is always after learning. 2 is after always learning from what 1 is doing. But 1 with the bad signal doesn't learn from what 2 is doing at all. He just doesn't find it worthwhile. Okay. So in this equilibrium, what happens is, if you look at that, there are 4 possible signals that could happen. If both have bad signals, then of course 1 exits here and 2 follows immediately. So they exit at the same time and they get the same expected payoff. If both have good signals, then they both exit at this time and they get the same expected payoff. If 1 signal is good and 2 is bad, then also they exit at the same time. 2 enters here and 1 exits immediately afterwards. Here 1 follows 2, 1 follows 2, not the other. The difference arises when 1's information is bad while 2 is recklessly optimistic, maybe, or just has this good signal. Now what happens is that 1 exits early. 2, because of his good information, stays longer. And in this case, he's accumulating positive expected profits because it's still profitable to stay here. So 1 is exiting too early from an ex-post perspective, but there's no way he can learn whether 2 signal is G2, so he just exits early. There's nothing he can do. And therefore, this is the only circumstance in which 2 does better than 1. In every other circumstance, they get the same payoff, they stay the same, the probabilities are the same. But in this circumstance, 2 does better than 1. And therefore, this is the only situation in which 2 stays longer than 1 does and makes money doing that, and it's profitable. So, so you can see that the equilibrium payoffs of the thing is just the R&D payoff. The difference in the payoffs is just whatever is obtained in this interval, this extra interval of R&D in between these 2 time periods, and this is strictly positive, or rather pi 2 star is strictly better than pi 1. These are some conditions under which this happens. So 2 has to have some information, if this is a half, then 2 signal is completely uninformative. And you have to enter with 1 bad signal, 1 and 2's good signal. It should be the case that firms do want to at least enter the race to start R&D. If this was less than P star, you don't even want to start R&D. Right? And their payoffs are the same either if 2 has no information. Right? If 2 has no information, then this B1, G2 would be the same as B1. So there'd be no gap here. It would exit immediately on both counts. And on the other hand, if 1 has perfect information, then 1 has nothing, then 2 can just completely ignore his information, just piggyback on what 1 is doing. So in these 2 extreme cases, the payoffs are the same in this equilibrium. Otherwise, under these conditions, the payoff ranking is strict. So this kind of equilibrium exists for all values of Q1, Q2. So on the x-axis, we have 1's quality, quality of information of firm 1, and on the y-axis, we have the quality of information of firm 2. And since 1's quality is better, we're always in the lower triangle here. And an equilibrium of this sort always exists for all values of these parameters. Okay. And what this green curve depicts is in this lower triangle, we already said that if 1 had perfect information, then their payoffs would be the same. And if 2 had no information, then their payoffs would be the same. But in fact, anywhere below this green curve, they have the same payoffs, and everywhere above the green curve, the 2 has a higher payoff than 1. Right? So even though his quality of information is poorer, 2's payoff is higher than 1's payoff. Profits are higher. So as I've already explained, the learning takes place because firm 2 with either signal learns firm signal, and only firm 1 with the good signal learns firm 2 signal. And in the situation that we talked about, firm 1 exits too early to learn 2 signals. So this is as if the established firm, Bristol Myers or something, they're not optimistic about developing the drug. And on the other hand, the startup is optimistic. This firm could try to learn what the startup knows, but it thinks its quality of information is so good and their startups is so bad that it decides not to wait. But you can have exposed regret if this happens. Okay. So this is the equilibrium as I've described. It has this kind of property. Now you can show, and I won't spend too much time on this, that if firm 1 is much better informed, what that means is Q1 is much better than Q2, then there are no other equilibria. This equilibrium is the only one. And the argument is not very hard. It involves, it's a little involved, but not hard. Each step is quite simple. So let me just give you a little flavor for how you do that. I won't go into details that inelegant even, I would say. So let's look at firm 1 with signal G1. So it has good information. So now, so what we're trying to do is to carry out some iterative elimination of dominated strategies in this game. So, but it's quite simple to understand what's going on. So suppose 1 has good information. So what is the earliest it should leave? Well, what's the worst information that it can get about 2 signals? The worst thing that can happen from its perspective is that 2's information is bad. My information is good, but 2's information is bad. So there's no point in exiting before this, right? This is the worst possible event from 1's perspective. So 1 should stay at least this long. There's no point in exiting before this. Similarly, for firm 2 with a good signal, what's the worst thing that can happen from its perspective is that 1 has a bad signal. So 1 should stay, 2 with the good signal should stay at least the green firm should stay at least this long if it has the good signal. That's very easy to see. These are just worst possible cases. Okay. Now let's look at firm 1 with the bad signal. If firm 1 has a bad signal, what's the best news it could get? Well, the best news it could get is that the other firm has a good signal. So certainly it should not stay longer than this, longer than TB1G2. But now you can immediately see what the issue is, because with a good signal, firm 1 is bound to stay at least this long. And with a bad signal, this firm is not going to stay longer than this. So with the bad signal, it exits before this point, and with the good signal, it stays at least until this point. So there's this separation of the two intervals. And what that means is that if firm 2 were willing to stay right until here, it would learn what 1 knows. Right? It would learn, because if it were the bad signal, it would not stay longer than this. If it were a good signal, it would stay at least this long. It would stay longer than this. By staying until TB1G2, 2 could learn 1 signal. And then a little calculation, and this is just a little tricky, shows that it's if your quality of, this is all the ugly calculations I said, if your quality of information, if the quality of information of 1 is much better than that of 2, it's worthwhile to stay this long. And then you just carry on some more iterated elimination of dominated strategies to get this, the fact that this is the unique Nash outcome in this game. That's the idea. So I've shown you that there's an equilibrium in which firm 2 wins more often. And in fact, if it's much better informed, this is the unique equilibrium in this game. So in this kind of picture I was drawing before, in Q1, Q2 space, there's this purple curve. And if you are below the purple curve for any Q1, if Q2 is low enough, then there's a unique equilibrium in this game. But remember, there was also the green curve, which tells you when the payoff ranking was strict, but it turns out the green curve lies below the purple curve. So there's always this intermediate region in which the payoff ranking is, there's a unique equilibrium and the payoff ranking is strict in this region. Yeah? Below the green curve, the payoff ranking is not strict. They have the same payoff. These two are equal in this, but there's always this open set of parameters towards this. Now, everything I told you about is with just 2 signals, but if there were many signals and under some monotone likelihood ratio assumptions and the fact that 2 signals are poor, you can construct the same sort of equilibrium. The result goes through for arbitrary numbers of signals in this thing. So there's still either the innovation is feasible or not, but you could have many possible signals, you know, that you're mildly optimistic or very optimistic, etc. But the whole thing goes through. There's no special. Okay. So why do we have this strange kind of result that better information is a disadvantage in this game? And it's not an unnatural game. It's not even a very original game. These kinds of R&D races have been studied before. There's some resemblance to wars of attrition, to models of strategic experimentation. Why do we have this really counterintuitive finding that information is a disadvantage in this? So in game theory, there are other kinds of information paradoxes, so to speak. So one could be that in many games there's a second mover advantage. You want to wait to see what the other person does before you move. But that's not what's happening here, because the game itself does not specify any order of moves. Who exits when is endogenous. You can decide when to. We don't say that 1 moves and then 2 moves, and it's the second mover advantage because 2 is moving after 1. That's not pre-specified. It just happens endogenously. There's a question?
Glasses, Vijay.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a question. What is the other equilibrium when information difference is small?
Very good, very good. Okay, let's go back to that. So what happens is that when information differences are small, so in particular, imagine that both have exactly the same quality of information, exactly on the 45-degree line, then there are at least two equilibria, because there's one in which, of the kind we described, where one's payoff is higher. There's a mirror equilibrium in which 2 has the higher equilibrium payoff. So in one equilibrium, 1 exits early and 2 follows, and the other happens. So there are always at least 2 equilibria when you get close to the 45-degree line in this that means there's bound to be a third also in between, but you can have just a mirror image of this equilibrium, and we'll come to that also in a second.
Vijay, any empirical grounding for that? I mean, for certain products, if the information difference is small, does it turn out that the incumbent...
We don't have that, but we do have this empirical finding of Krieger's that smaller firms tend to learn more pay more attention, and so their quit rates respond to other firms quitting more than the bigger firms' quit rates respond to smaller firms.
Right, but this is really a result about the closeness of the quit rates, right? I mean
No, it says how the quit rates change. So I have it just says that in response. So you could think of the exercise like he has a whole he has all these data on what is the increase in my quitting rate in response to a small firm quitting or a big firm quitting. And he finds that
I see.
The highest quit rate response is of a small firm when a big firm quits. That's his finding.
So I suppose the other axis here is how close is the informational advantage in that particular kind of product.
So that's not something you'll find in the data, but the assumption is that the established firms have high. So there's the leap from there, from size to quality of information that we are making, that the incumbent the Bristol Myers has better information about the likelihood of success than Moderna or whatever, the small startup firm.
And there's another question, Vijay.
Yes.
Suppose there were 2 startup firms and 1 incumbent, then what happens to the time until one or both of the startups quit after they have inferred the incumbent's early on signal?
So we looked at this and we assumed that the 2 startups were different also. So there was like there was a Q1, a Q2, and a Q3, and Q2 was bigger than Q3. And then you can work out the equilibrium in the same way, in this way. But if they're both of the same quality, then nothing much changes. The computations are slightly different, but essentially the same thing happens. So many startups don't affect this.
And do we have anything about the optimal number of firms then, if you have many startups? Because in some sense, if you have a value that's attached to the information,
yes,
just thinking about the planner's problem.
Yes. Of course, the planner would always want, if their information is actually conditionally independent, the planner would like lots and lots of startups, because all.
No, but there's a cost. No, there's an R&D cost.
There's an R&D cost, but certainly moving from 1 to 2, it's definitely in the interest of the planner to keep both firms going. You can figure out the optimal exit times, and so you have 3 firms in the consortium. Maybe they quit earlier to save on time, but you want all 3 there from the beginning. So you don't want to shut anybody out. That's a result we showed. You don't want to shut anybody out. It's advantageous to get them into the consortium, but then maybe you want to quit earlier than they would if they were acting independently. Good. So in this model, it's not the second, and it's not a second mover advantage which is driving this kind of result. Now, the other thing that we know already is that in many situations with many agents, information can have a negative value. It's not always. I mean, the classic example is, of course, let's say the Acrotlock's lemons problem, right? Where if the seller knows the quality of the product, then no trade takes place, and you know that if the seller did not know the quality of the product and the buyer did not take the quality, then there would be trade. And so in some sense, the seller is worse off because he's informed about the quality of the car. That's
also all the herding literature, Vijay.
That's different. You're learning from other people there. Here I'm just talking about just the value of information, value of the signal itself. Right?
I see.
And so in so information could have a negative value, just like in. So this is well known. So is this what's happening here? And so the answer is no. Answer is no. Information has positive value here. So what I mean by that is that let's say one has better information than two, then you see how one's equilibrium profits change as the quality of his information improves. That's positive. That means that one is better informed, would still like to have even better quality information, even higher quality information. And the same is true for two. Two would also like better quality of information. So in this equilibrium, the value of information for both is positive in the sense that they would both prefer to have higher quality information, right? And actually, you can even say something about this cross-partial derivative of how one's profits are affected by two's quality of information. So this is not what is driving the result that the firm with higher quality gets lower profits. Both would like better information in this thing. So it says that wherever you are, one's profits are increasing in this direction. His own quality improves, his profits go up. The other person's quality goes up, his profits still improve in this model. So what our result is not about, so the value of information question is something about the slope of this one's profit function, right? It says that if I increase the quality of one's information, which I've put down on this axis, this is upward sloping. This is upward sloping. So one would, in this equilibrium that we have computed, one would like to have as high a quality of information as it could. What our result is saying is not about the slope, it's about the level. It's saying that two's curve lies high above one's curve when one's quality is higher than two's quality. This is two's quality, and I've taken one's quality to be over here. So our result is about the levels and not the slopes. The value of information question is about the slope of these curves. So both have upward sloping curves, but in fact, two's curve lies above one's payoff curve as a function of Q1. So quality of information helps both firms. It's just that it helps two more, if you will, in some sense. That's it. And there's some, if you draw this precisely, these are exact points where these kinks and these things become the same. The curve becomes the same. Remember, at some point they become the same as one's quality approaches one. That's over here. Okay. So you might ask also whether if one is getting a lower profit than two, as we have shown, well, could it gain by just shutting down its R&D activity completely and just mimicking what two does, for instance? And a little argument, which I only have 5 minutes, I won't do, but it shows that that's not profitable here. But here, you have to think about this mirror equilibrium. So the star is the equilibrium we've constructed where two's payoff is higher. In this region, there's this other equilibrium, the double star equilibrium, where one's payoff is higher, because in fact, now we're on this side of the 45-degree line, and now 2 has better information than 1. Q2 is bigger than Q1 here. Q1 is bigger than Q2 in the lower triangle. And so we have that mirror equilibrium, and right at the 45-degree line, both kinds of equilibria exist. This was an answer to the question that was asked earlier. And a little argument shows that, so we're trying to ask, could we suppose this is the initial situation? One's quality is Q prime and 2's is Q double prime. And this is the original payoff. And of course, one's payoff is lower than 2's payoff. Well, what would happen if 1 just completely stopped, fired all their researchers and said, no, we're just going to try to mimic what 2 does? Could that be worthwhile? And a little argument shows that the answer is no. You cannot gain by becoming willfully ignorant, so to speak, in this example. So what I'm saying is that the value of information calculation that we did was just a derivative calculation. So it's a local calculation. Where did that go? Where was that? Okay, so that was just a local calculation about the derivatives. But in fact, even these big jumps in information cannot help you in this problem. So this is not the reason, and this is not the reason for this result. And this seems to be, to our knowledge, this is the first we're first to point out that this fact that when you know a lot, then you don't want to invest in learning from somebody who knows less than you. And in this example, this game, this has this paradoxical feature that this force is so strong that the person who's less informed and therefore keener to learn actually ends up in a better situation than the better informed person. This is the main lesson of this. So I want to take 2 minutes to tell you about one more diagnostic on the model. So suppose we had a patent race in which you couldn't observe when the other person quit the race. So in pharmaceuticals, as I said, you have to firm C when you quit, because you have to report failures to the authorities, and those are made public. But in other cases, it might be that when you exit, it's the other firm cannot see that you've exited. So it's not sure whether you've quit or not. Okay, so everything is the same except the exit is unobserved. And so now it's not possible to learn a rival signal. So by doing this unobserved exit, or we've actually shut off the learning channel completely. You cannot learn a rival signal because you don't see what he's doing. So now our strategy is very simple here, because there's only unilateral exit. You don't know anything about what the other firm, you cannot react to the other firm does. And it turns out that with unobserved exit, there's a unique Nash equilibrium again. Okay, and this is always true. And now the better informed firm has a higher payoff than the less informed. Okay, so we don't get this paradoxical result if we shut down the learning channel. So this points to say that that is exactly the reason why we get this paradoxical ranking of the payoffs, that the better informed firm is worse off than the less informed firm. It's only because of there's nothing in the model that drives that, as such, nothing in the payoffs, etc., that drives that.
But the exit patterns continue, right, Vijay?
Yeah, there's a complicated exit pattern, but you exit only on the basis of your own information, what you think about what the other person's doing. But in the end, nothing paradoxical happens in that one. So if you shut off the learning, then there's no paradox at all in this problem. So that's the so without learning, better information is no longer a competitive disadvantage. It's the learning which is doing everything here. Okay, so I'm right on time, and let me stop here.
Yeah.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you
answer.
so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Vijay. I don't see any
Very
more
good.
questions.
Okay.
You've given us a lot to think about. I understood it much better the second time, so I should always look at your papers twice. I think.
Very good. Thank you.
That's the lesson. So there's good news for social mobility in your paper.
Yes, yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
Or at least for startups. There's good news for startups. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Vijay.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Very
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and it was really wonderful to return, if only virtually. So it was
great.
okay. Thanks very much. Thank you.